Welcome to another 5-minute religious education recap video. We're on the exam board Eduqas. We are looking at foundational Catholic theology. We're exploring the good and evil unit, and today's session is going to focus on Catholic responses to the problem of evil and suffering. So hopefully you'll be able to explain those two ideas and understand them by the end of this session. Now, first of all, for Catholics, they see evil and suffering as a test of faith. Many Catholics, they believe that when you look at the Bible, God must have a reason for allowing evil and suffering, but humans cannot fully understand what that is. They just need to trust in God and his ways. Most famously, this comes through in the book of Job. Job, he's a very religious man, but he finds himself in a situation where he's suffering and he loses everything that he has. Now, Job questions God and he says, if I've sinned, what have I done to you? You who sees everything that we do. Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Like that typical question of, why are these things happening to me? What have I done wrong? There's a really big discussion in the book of Job, but God turns around and he says, were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. It's a little bit of a sarcastic response really from God, because what God's trying to identify to Job is that I've always been there and I will always be there. I am greater than you. You shouldn't be questioning me. And this comes down to the idea that it's a test for Job. He just needs to deal with his situation and trust that God will always be there for him. And that's what many Catholics will do. They'll look at that story and say, I need to trust in God at this moment in time, that this is all part of his plan. Secondly, Catholics will look at the example of Jesus. And they would say that when it comes to evil and suffering, you need to follow the example of Jesus and fight against that evil and suffering. Jesus prayed for those who suffered. He helped and he healed those who suffered. So Catholics, they can follow in those footsteps. Now, looking at Jesus' life, we can see here, he helped the lepers, the blind, the paralyzed. He even stood up for the mistreated, such as, women and the poor. So Catholics should do the same thing. They should pray for those who suffer, but they should take up jobs such as doctors, nurses, social workers, try and help reduce that amount of suffering in the world. So secondly, response to evil and suffering, follow that example of Jesus. Thirdly, humans are to blame. Catholics will take the view that evil and suffering, it isn't caused by God, it's caused by humans. God gave the gift of free will, the ability to choose good or evil. This means that we have a chance of bringing pain and suffering to others. We also have the chance of bringing goodness into the world, but it comes down to the choices we make, nothing to do with God, and that is a valid response. Looking at this, we could look at the example of Jesus. Jesus gave plenty of teachings, things like on the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, or love thy neighbour. Even Moses with the Ten Commandments, there's a set of instructions there on how to be a good person. If humans just followed those, they would bring goodness into the world, not evil, but it's humans to blame here, not God. Now, number 4, evil and suffering can be seen as preparation for heaven. So many Catholics, they believe that evil and suffering in this life isn't a problem because it's preparing for life in heaven, in paradise. Now, if people are to improve their souls, then they need to face evil and suffering in order to be good, kind and loving. God, therefore, although he could, because he's omnipotent, he doesn't want to remove any of this evil or suffering in the world because it does provide people with the best chance of becoming better and becoming good and improving themselves. So ultimately, this is God showing his own benevolence by I suppose, allowing us to experience this evil and suffering. This is kind of developed by a famous scholar called John Hick, and he builds upon this idea of Imago Dei, in the image of God. He says we're made in the image of God to grow into his likeness. He says the only way we can grow into the likeness is through our lives, our choices and our experiences here on earth. And he describes it as a veil of soul making, almost like the earth is this place where your soul will develop and grow. So evil and suffering helps us to grow and become more godlike and allow us to get to heaven. Finally, number 5 here, we've got God is transcendent. If you remember the word transcendence, it means God is beyond time and space. So when we think about God being beyond time and space, basically God is beyond human understanding. His ways and his methods can't be fully understood, and therefore humans shouldn't even question evil and suffering. And the final point is that evil and suffering helps us to appreciate the goodness in the world. Without evil and suffering, people would not truly appreciate the good that they experience. Ultimately, we need opposites because they help us to appreciate the opposite end. So we need good to know that there's bad. We need bad to know that there's good. You can't have one without the other. Now have a look down the list. Check out each of these keywords. See if you can link it into how Catholics would respond to the problem of evil and suffering. If you can do that, you've been successful today. If you want to push yourself that little bit further, you could look at these example questions. There's a range of B, C and D styles on there. Whatever you get up to, good luck and thank you for listening.